Hey guys, so now I have everything that I want planted in the garden for spring. It is time to start some seeds at home, which means the seed pod is back. For anyone that doesn't know, my name is Peggy and I am growing a cut flower garden here on my allotment in Kanagawa Prefecture, Japan, which is just south of Tokyo in USDA Zone 9B. Thanks for checking out my channel. I'm saying the pod is back, but the keen-eyed among you might notice that it's actually a new pod. It is. It's full disclosure, new pod. Exactly the same as my old pod, except it's black instead of green. But it is a new pod, and that's because my old pod that I'd used for the last 2 years melted. Yep, melted. So I use this pod to start these seeds, and then I use them to start my summer seeds, but after that I don't really have any use for it. So I had put it down the side of my house here. In Japan, you have to build 50 centimeters from your boundary line before you're allowed to start your new house, which means most houses are a meter apart. As you can see, this is my next door neighbor's house, very close to ours. But luckily, this is exactly 50 centimeters, so it fits down the side of my house. Now that is a really narrow little strip, but it's in the shade. It is a shady spot. It's protected, obviously, from the wind because the houses are so close together. And I thought, that's okay, it can just sit down there. No. When I went to get it out to start these seeds this year, it had completely melted. The plastic on the top had melted, and of course because that had melted, the rain had been getting in, and all of the metal bars had kind of rusted around where they fit into the plastic bits that hold them in place, and so the whole thing was just falling apart. That might give you an idea of how hot it is here in the summer. This was in the shade, not in direct sun, and just the whole top of it had completely peeled away and melted. Now this is sold as an all-year garden house structure, so it should be able to deal with those temperatures, but it was just so hot this year. And it wasn't just that. You'll know that when I grow things, if you've been following along, I like to use these new little growing pods like this. Now these were a complete game changer for me. Last year I bought these, and they're kind of 3 sets. So you've got your little humidity dome, which you can open to let in more air, and then there's the bottom tray and this, so you can bottom water your plants, which for me was huge because I was losing so many plants to wetting off. And they're a good size for me, only having 12 cells. I don't need masses of plants because my garden is tiny. So these were an absolute lifesaver. And this is really good, strong plastic. It's not really flimsy. You know, these hold the weight of things. They don't flop around like some of the thinner plastic trays that you can get. And yet, this is what they're meant to look like. And this is what some of them look like now. They have melted and warped out of shape on the bottom, and the humidity domes have melted, see if I can get one out, completely distorted and melted. I can no longer get the bit to stay on top, and they've completely rounded off. So I've had to lose a couple of these, and again, these were in the shade. They weren't in direct sun. I hadn't left them anywhere. These were inside the dome, but in the shade, and it's just too hot. So yeah, I had to lose some of them. Most of them were okay though, but I did have to go out and buy a new dome. Which leads on to why am I only just starting seeds in November, when most of the backs of my seed packets say I could have started these around, most of these in September. And the answer is, it's just too hot. When you look at your USDA zone, I'm in zone 9B, that tells you how mild your winter is, but it doesn't tell you your climate. It's purely how cold is it going to get for how long over the winter. And so while we have very mild winters, we also have very hot autumns and very hot springs, and it takes a really long time for things to cool down. And I have planted stuff out in September, had it going really well here. The sprouts had come up, I'd taken off the humidity domes, and in the space of a morning, literally a sunrise, so sun comes up at what, 6:30, 6 here, and then I was coming out to water things once I got the kids to school, so 9:30. Within that 3 hours, everything had burnt. It was just a crispy, dried out mess, and I have lost so many seedlings doing that I just thought, why? It's come to, this is the third, fourth time that I have now been seeding things in autumn for spring, and it's just given me that little bit of confidence to say, I know the seed packet says I can start these in September, but I can't, not in my climate. I've really got to wait until it's much cooler. I mean, I say much cooler, it's a beautiful sunny day today. which is why I've actually put this a little bit in the shade, because I don't want it getting too hot. but I really do, for my area, I have to ignore what the seed packet says and follow what I've learned in the past year, in the last years, which is that realistically now, mid to late November, is when I want to be starting these. Now that does make me worry a little bit that these aren't going to have enough growing time to come in the spring, because it also gets very hot in the spring. But a lot of these, especially stuff like my stock, which I'm going to be putting in today, they're not so much affected by the temperature as by daylight hours. So they kind of come up and they start doing their thing, but they don't really start growing until there's a certain set amount of daytime hours. And for us, that happens around February, March. And so I'm really getting my stock in very early in the season anyway. So I'm hoping that because they're based on daylight hours for growth, that as opposed to length of time actually sitting in the ground, that these are still going to work out okay and come up for me at the right time in spring. Okay, so what am I starting today? Not a huge amount, to be honest. I am all for doing as little work as possible in the garden. Anything that makes it easier for me is good. So I have tried to direct seed as much as possible this year into the garden. Again, because I am 9B, we don't have a massive, hugely cold winter, and I am planning on putting low tunnels, frost cloth and mulching heavily onto the garden to help protect against the few frosts that we do have. But I'm really trying to direct seed as much as possible, and I'll put a link below into the last videos that I've done about direct seeding into the garden and what's in there already. But that means that I don't have that much left, to be honest. So what am I putting in? I am putting in my Snapdragon. But again, not a huge variety. Now in the past I have grown quite a lot of different Snapdragons. I've grown Monarch, I've grown the Monarch, Madam Butterfly, I've grown the Potomac, which are my favourite, and that's what I wanted, and specifically I wanted the Potomac Lavender this year, and I could not get it in Japan. Just couldn't get it, and Japan's very strict on what seeds I am allowed to import in, and I just could not get my hands on it, so I'm really upset. So if you're watching in Japan and you know where I can get Potomac Lavender Snapdragon, I would be really happy if you could drop a link in the comments for me. That would be great. But because I couldn't get what I wanted, I was really good with myself, because in years past I've just bought whatever I could get my hands on, and I've ended up growing stuff that I didn't really like and therefore didn't really use, and there's no point in me doing that. It's just taking up room in my garden, and although it looks pretty in the garden, if I'm not using it to design with, you know, yeah. So last year I grew the pink soda ones, and they came up for me really early. They lasted a long time, and they were by all accounts a good flower to have, but they were just such a weird colour. And not weird in a bad way, I'm sure a lot of people would have liked them, but they just really didn't go with any of the other colours that I had growing in my garden. And so I just ended up not using them. I kind of had bunches of them just by themselves. As far as the other varieties I've grown, with the exception of the Potomac, I've never really been happy with how they've performed. Now I've done a lot of experimenting with pinching, not pinching, water propagating, soil propagating, and I'll drop the links to the videos for those underneath this one. But really I found that they weren't great. The stems that I got were nice, I just didn't get enough stems to really justify growing them. And then a lot of them I found were growing too short. So I've kind of scrapped everything that I've grown before and said, with the exception of the Potomac, there's not really anything I would grow again, except these, which are my Raspberry Ripple. Is that what they're called? I really love these. They grew tall, they grew straight, they grew a lot, they came back, although they did take a little time to come back, and they went so beautifully with the likes of my vintage stock that I had at the same time, with my Peggy Wonder tulip, which I didn't have a lot of, but also just by themselves. I really loved these, so they were definitely the top of my list, and really the only thing I wanted specifically to grow again in the garden this year. For the other ones, I've just gone for this, which is a mix. I kind of decided that I didn't want to do mixes because there were so many things that I wasn't using that I didn't like, but I thought this is actually quite a nice mix, and they're huge. A lot of the other ones I buy, these ones included, it's kind of like that burst at the bottom and then you kind of have the bobbly tops, whereas these ones are much more a huge full flower. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to give these a try and just see how I like them. They're not garish colours, you know, they are kind of a darker or softer pink there. And and then the white that goes with everything, and yellow's kind of springy. So I'm just going to give these ones a try and see how they do. I did like that they are the really tall variety as well. It says here they grow between 100 and 130 centimeters. So I'm looking forward to seeing how these do. I do have one other that I'm going to start, and I'm still not sure if I'm going to put them in the garden. It depends how many of these I get going and how much space that takes up. And that is these ones. And it's not that I don't like them. I really like the colour, and again, it's very much in my colour scheme. I know my colour scheme is not to everyone's taste. I do like darker, weirder colours, but I think these with my black tulips are going to look absolutely amazing. The only problem is when I bought these, I did not pay enough attention to the packet, and you can see here they only grow 40 or 50 centimetres tall. 100 to 130 centimeters, 40 to 50. Now the problem that I had with some of the ones that I've grown in the past is that they were so short, but it's not necessarily that they're short, it's that when they're short, the stems are really, really thin. Now if I'm doing a handheld, that's not such a huge problem, but I like to do a lot of mine in a more Japanese style. I live in Japan. And so I'm using pin frogs a lot of the time, and when the stems are so thin, it's really hard to get them to stay where you want them in a pin frog arrangement. So I'm gonna put these in, and if I've got space in the garden, I will put them in. I'm a little disappointed because they're such a pretty colour, and I really like the colour. I wanted them to grow taller, but we'll put them in and see how they do. Yeah, but that is it for my Snapdragon. I'm keeping it really basic this year. That's it. So the other thing I'm seeding today is going to be my stock, and I'm starting with two that I love. Of course, my vintage stock, which is my favourite and I would not be without in my garden. I really like it. It fits my colour palette beautifully. It smells amazing. It's a nice height and it's a good producer. I really, really like this one. The other one is my apricot stock, which I've had in since the first year, and I really like it just because it's such a surprisingly versatile colour, and it really helps balance the darker colours that I have in my garden. My problem this year was that I couldn't find any, so I'm having to use leftover seed that I have from last year. Now, when I've grown seed before from old seed, it's really not done well. It does not like the humidity in Japan. Even if I'm keeping it sealed or chilled, it's just not liking it at all. And I've had real problems with germination of older seed, and that's just 1 year old. That's not what would be considered old seed. But it's the only thing I've got, so I'm going to try and start it. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, I'll cry. But I'm going to try and start this old seed anyway. After that, I've gone for some of these, it's the Christmas variety. So this is Christmas pink, and what's the other one I've got? Christmas blue. So again, this one I think will fit in nicely with my Nimbus sweet pea, my delphinium that I've got going, some of my viola and pansy that I've put in the garden. I'm really thinking that will look nice with those. It's pretty. And then this one looks really nice online, and looking at it now, I'm like, why did I buy bright pink? It's not really my thing. But we've got some bright pink, so let's get that in. The other one I have is again a mixed, but this is the quartet stock. Now, I didn't know this existed until last year. Some of them in my garden apparently was this, because I was really surprised to find that instead of one stem of stock, I was getting 3, which is a nice bonus. The second and third stems were a lot smaller, but you know, they were still there, and for the type of bud vase arrangement that I do a lot, it doesn't matter that they're smaller. So I then went out and found that it's actually called Stork Quartet series, and it puts up multiple stems. So again, these colours aren't overly offensive, kind of got a deep red that matches everything else, some of these softer yellows, which I've actually liked. I grew the kind of butter yellow last year. What was it called? Just field yellow stock, and I actually really liked it. It's not my go-to colour, but it was nice. And again, the whites that go with everything. There's kind of that softer pink at the back as well, which kind of helps tie in some of the other colours. So when I found the quartet stock, I was really happy, and I'm going to get that in again. Yeah, so stock. And the only other thing I have to plant is by accident. And again, not paying attention while I am buying seeds and corm, I have ranunculus seed. Now, when I bought this, I thought it was ranunculus corm, which is what I have grown from before, but I was very surprised to find out that it was ranunculus seed. Kind of silly on my part. I should have known that for ranunculus like this, which is a bit fancy and special. The price I paid for this was not enough for corms. I thought I'd hit the jackpot. Oh no, I'd hit seeds. I've never grown ranunculus from seeds. I've never seen anyone grow ranunculus from seed. I do not know how this is going to go. But I have them, so we are doing a ranunculus from seed experiment. Now, if I can get these going and these do as well as my corm, this is a game changer, because these were so much cheaper for the amount I have. I don't actually know how many I have. What we got? Oh my goodness, look, they're like treasure. Okay, so I'm guessing these are actually little bundles of seeds that have all been bound together, which usually happens quite often with very, very small seed. But I mean, if I can get each one of these to germinate and turn into a productive plant this year for the price I paid, I would not have got that many corm. So, yeah. Little experiment that I was not expecting to do, but I will be really, really happy if I can pull off. So let's plant up some ranunculus seed. So to sow my seeds, I am going to be using these little seed boxes. Now, like I say, I got these last year and they were a complete game changer for me. I had such better germination with these, and I think mostly that was because of the ability to bottom water. I cleaned these at the end of the year and have stored them away, and with the exception of the ones that melted, there's no wear and tear on these at all, so I think these are going to last me a really, really long time, which I like. I got them online. They came as a set of 10, which is 10 full 3-part sets, which was really economical. Love them. So I'm going to be using these again. They also came with funky little tools for putting your seed in, for making the holes in the pots, for plucking them back out again, and for digging down so you can easily remove them from these at the end. So yeah, bonus. So to start these, I've got a good potting mix, specifically for starting flower seeds in, and a really big bowl. Why? Because I fill all of my boxes with pre-moistened soil. These seeds are so tiny that if you were to put your soil in, put the seeds in and then water them, a lot of the seeds will simply get washed away. They'll get moved around and you will lose them. So it's really important when working with tiny seeds like these that you pre-moisten your soil, put the wet soil, damp, not wet, damp soil into your trays, and then I just sprayed water all over myself. Into your trays, and then you don't have to water them once you have planted the seeds. This is kind of what you want. You don't want it to be dripping when you squeeze it, but you kind of want it to hold into a ball, hold its shape. So that is good. A really good tip I got from one of you guys last year in the comments was to leave one of these empty, and that means you can just pour water into there, so you're not having to lift them out of the tray to actually get water into the bottom of the tray, which can be really annoying. So if you leave one empty, you can just pour water straight in there, it filters down into the bottom and waters all the other. Thanks, Heather, that was a good tip. Okay, I'm going to start with the ranunculus because honestly they're the most terrifying. I'm also going to put on my glasses because they're small and I can't see. So I think I've counted 21 seeds in here, and I'm just going to try and start them all and see how they do. I'm going to do 1 in each cell. Quite often, and with the others I'm going to do 2 in each cell, but for these I'm actually just going to do 1 in each cell because they look to be a little cluster of seeds anyway. And I really want these to work, so I'm just giving them as much room as I can. So I'm going to go ahead with my little pointy tool, make a hole, drop in a seed, and then barely cover it. Just slightly cover it over so it's still getting some light. Here we go. I'm making just a really, really shallow hole there. I don't want these in deep at all. Don't forget to label everything. I always forget to label. Make sure you're labeling. And I'm going to make sure the little dome is shut like this, just until they germinate. So next I'm going to do my stalk, and I'm going to start with my vintage stalk because it's my favorite. This is what your stalk seed looks like. It's quite small, and because of that, it's quite small. Hi. Because it's quite small, I am going to go ahead and I'm going to put 3 in each cell. And that's not just because it's small, it's because later I'm going to come back and I'm going to select for doubles. So stalk, usually you can get single stalk or double stalk. And while they're both beautiful flowers, the double stalk, it just has a double layer of petals on it. And it's just much fuller and nicer. So if I can, I would like to come back, and you can tell which ones are which once they start to sprout. You can tell because of the color and the shape of their leaves. So I'm going to put 3 in, knowing that quite a lot of these might turn out to be singles, and I'm going to go and just pull them out and only continue growing the doubles. So I will put 3 of these into each cell and just see how many cell boxes that takes up. So next I'm going to do my quartet, and there's quite a lot of seed in there, so I am going to plant up all of this because it is my main one that I want. For the others, I'm just going to do 1 seed tray of each, because I'm not sure if I love the colours, I'm not sure if I'm going to have too much stock, how much room I'm going to have in the garden, and I'm not sure if my apricot seed is going to do anything at all. If this is your first time watching my videos, I live next to a tennis court, and there are some very enthusiastic guys playing tennis right now, which is what you're hearing in the background. But yeah, I'm going to plant up all of this, but then just 1 tray of the others, because I'm not sure if I like them, if I've got space, or if their apricot one is going to germinate. Quartet. Okay, I have finished all of my ranunculus and my stock, and they are looking good and ready to go, but I have run out of little pots, so I have to go and mix up some more soil. Okay, so all I've got left are my Snapdragon. Now, I grow these a little bit differently, and this is, everyone's got their opinion on what's best. Everyone, most things that I see, people tell you to pinch your Snapdragon. Now, I have done quite a lot of testing, I guess, where I have pinched, I have not pinched, I have water propagated, I have soil propagated, and I've looked at the results of each of those. And there were huge differences in those, and I'll put a link to the video. But what I want to try this year is growing them in little kind of clumps. So instead of having 1 seed and 1 plant come up, I'm going to see if I can get them to grow better in little clumps. Now for me, I'm thinking this might work better, A, because the competition is going to force them to get higher. I have quite a problem with them staying quite short. But also I'm thinking that might actually help them support themselves. I have really high winds here, and we have typhoon season, we have really heavy rain. I'm thinking if I grow them in a little clump and I net them, that might actually help them support each other and stay a little bit more upright. I have a huge problem with the winds and the rain coming in and knocking down my Snapdragon, even if they're netted, and they end up all helter-skelter, because Snapdragon are really bad for seeking the sun. So if they fall down, they will self-correct very quickly, like within a day. They will self-correct and start growing upwards towards the sun again, but it ends up with a kind of twisty stem. So if you then come and lift that back up, you're ending up with the original straight stem, and then where it's corrected itself, it's now going off at a right angle over there, and then it'll correct itself again. So I'm thinking this year, what I'm going to try is just to grow them in little clumps. So I'm going to be putting more than 1 seed into each of my tray cells, and seeing if I can get them to grow better that way. Again, it's an experiment. That's the point of my garden. I like to see how different growing techniques work. I think this year I will probably pinch half of them and not pinch. Now, last year I said I wasn't going to pinch and I didn't. And that did actually work very well for me, because our spring gets hot so fast that I feel that once I take, if I pinch, it then takes the flowers longer. You get more flowers, but it does delay the blossom. And for me, that delay in blossom just meant that it was 2 weeks, 3 weeks further down the line, and it was too hot, and I ended up with a much shorter season. Whereas if I had let them just not be pinched, come up, I'd have less flowers, but by the time I pinched, I would then get a second flush before the heat kicked in and really knocked them back completely. I am growing these purely as a spring flower now. I have learned they do not like the summer here. They really slow down, and for me that starts as early as the beginning of June. These guys are done. I am going to try and cut them back this year and see if I can keep them cooler over the summer through mulching and things like that, and then see if I can get them to give me a second flush possibly in the autumn is what I'm going for this time. But it really is an experiment to change how I grow them each year to see if it has any advantage, if it works better. So this year I'm going for little clumps stuck together and getting them in really early. Now, I plant these out in my garden in January. I did that last year, and I was cutting these along with my stock. I had some with my daffodil. They were one of the earliest things that actually started producing for me. Because I have such a mild winter, these guys can tolerate a frost. Woo! Getting windy and aeroplanes are going over. There must be a lot of noise going on. Yeah, these guys can tolerate a frost, so I don't get snow ever here. It's happened once. It lasted for about an hour. It was done. I very rarely get a really hard frost, especially if I'm putting frost cloth and things over, or even just mulching. The soil really doesn't freeze. So I can put these out in mid to late January and they are fine in the garden. You can actually direct seed these if you want. You could be direct seeding them and leaving them out in the garden. I just haven't had great success with that, and I prefer to, because my garden is so small, I want to know that what I'm putting in is a viable plant that is going to grow and produce flowers for me. So I'm not doing that. So I am going to get these started, because I love these black prints. Again, these were recommended to me and it was a great recommendation. Look at that color, they're amazing. But because they grow short, I don't want them to take up too much room in the garden, having learned from previous years that it is just not worth it. Can't arrange with them. So I am only going to put in one of these, so that'll be 12 little clumps, which is still a fair amount. And I'm going to try and get 2 seed trays out of each of the others. So I've taken one out for water, so it'll be 11 and 22 and 22 of my raspberry ripple, because they were so pretty. Let's get going. These, excuse my dirty fingernails, these seeds are ridiculously small. They're so hard to work with. I know that some people that are planting them commercially, or that just don't want to waste their seed, they quite often put them on a white plate, lick the end of a toothpick, and then literally pick up 1 or 2 seeds per cell and do it that way. I'm not gonna do that because it seems a bit mad. It is windy here though. I'm a bit worried they're gonna blow away. But yeah, I will probably put 3 or 4 seeds into each cell tray in a little clump, and hope that I don't just lose them all because they're so small. Again, you don't actually need to be covering these. You don't need to be putting them in a deep hole. You can just scatter them on the top and then kind of shift some soil over the top of them. I'm gonna make a slight indentation, but not much. Yeah, you don't need to be putting these in deep. Okay, that is everything in soil, so I am going to make sure that all of these are closed, just to keep the humidity in there nice and high until they germinate. As soon as I start to see probably about 50% germination, I will open these so that there's more airflow going in. I really do not want things wetting off. And then once nearly everything has germinated, I take these off altogether and just leave it like this for the rest of the winter. They really only need this until they have germinated. So I am going to take all of these over to my little pod. My garden is tiny at home, which is why I have an allotment to grow things in. So you are kind of squished between the grass and the sakura tree and my little pod, which is squished in next to the kids' paddling pool. Yeah, usually, hold this tree out my way. Usually I just kind of throw these in. I don't really pay much attention as to what is where, but I am making sure that my ranunculus are at the bottom and slightly back, because ranunculus do prefer to be cooler and darker as they grow. and I have checked, and it's the same for the seeds as it is for the corm. If you are starting to pre-sprout your ranunculus corm, which I haven't done this year, I'll put a link to my past years of doing that and to why I am not doing it this year. But if you are pre-sprouting, then you need to have them in complete darkness until the sprouts start to come. The seeds aren't quite that picky, but they do like to be cooler and darker for a longer period. Saying that, I mean, they're saying cool is about, you know, anywhere around 10 degrees, which, I mean, I'm from Scotland, it's pretty warm. So I am putting them in the shade. I have also located this in a slightly shadier spot because it is still getting hot, and I am going to leave the door open until it gets considerably, keep knocking the little lids off, until it gets considerably cooler. I might start closing this at night, but then opening it up every morning because we are still just too hot, and I don't want these guys to all just die off before they get started, mainly because I've just used up nearly all of the seed. But that is it. All started. So I have my garden stocked, I have all of my bulbs in, I've done my ranunculus, I've done my anemone, I've done my tulip, they are all in, my sweet pea are looking great, my freesia look amazing, and I am not going to lose them this year. So really, I am set. I'm so on it. Don't know what I'm going to do for the next couple of months other than weed. You know, it feels so good to get the garden started and know that this year I'm really focusing on spring and autumn because it's just too hot in the summer. Don't need it. Nothing grows. Nothing likes it. So I am really focusing on getting a big bumper crop, so I have lots of stuff to play with for my spring, and then starting to see if I can get some of this stuff like my Snapdragon. I might actually try and do a second planting of stock. I'm going to try and get a second blush off of my cosmos, and then I have some other specifically autumn things like my chrysanthemum. I'm planting my amaranth late, and I am putting in some African marigold. So I'm hoping that I'm going to have a really strong finish on my autumn season as well. Fall. I see that most of you guys are watching in America. Sorry, I always say autumn. Sorry, not sorry, it's autumn. But okay, fall. So I'm going for the spring and the fall flowers the most. So this has got me happy. And like I say, I don't have to wait that long before I get them out. I start to transplant this stuff out in January. I do use low tunnels and frost cloths. But yeah, most of this stuff will be in the ground by the end of January, beginning of February, so it really doesn't stay in this little pod very long. And that is it from me. Please let me know if you have grown any of this stuff before, if you have any tips or comments for me. You guys have given me some really good recommendations so far. Please keep them coming. Just drop a comment for me down below. I do read and reply to them all. How are your gardens doing? Are you much further on? Are you hotter than me and nowhere near this? Or do you have to wait till your spring to really get this stuff started if you're in a really cold climate? Everywhere is so different. It's really fun to see at what stage everybody is at. For my followers in Australia, sorry, I'm a bit out of sync for you, but I hope that you're having a good season so far as well. If you want to follow along and see how all this stuff does, please hit the subscribe button, and if you want to see what I do with all of the flowers that I cut, you can check out my Instagram, which is From the Witch's Garden, and there's a link to that below as well. And I will see you guys next week. Bye!